Hello everybody, back again, still on trigonometry. We're still calculating the size of an angle. This lesson is looking at how you do that when you are using sine. Remember, it's not called sin, it's abbreviated, there's meant to be an E there, this is called sine. The rule I'll remind you of, because we've seen this before, it's the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. So straight into my triangle, first things first, same as with every trig question, you must label the sides. So X is where I'm standing, okay? So if I come across from it, that's going to be my opposite side. The hypotenuse is the big diagonal, or technically speaking, opposite the right angle box, and the other side is the adjacent. So I have labelled my sides. I'm now going to write down the rule. Sine x is O over h. We can abbreviate the opposite and the hypotenuse down to O and h. I'm now going to take these two numbers, 10 and 18, and put them in over here, in the correct place. So sine x is going to equal the opposite, which is 10, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 18. Now, very similar to what we did in the last lesson with tan, I am now going to try and work out the size of the angle. To do that, it's going to be x equals. I need to do the opposite of sine, which is called inverse sine, which is written sine minus 1, and I'm going to put my 10 over 18 in a bracket. At this point, I need to go to my calculator. So remember, if you're using a phone calculator, which I think most of you probably will be using, we do this slightly differently from when we did it in class. So your phone calculator, if you turn it round so it's sideways, and then what you need to do is you need to do the 10 over 18, so I need to do 10 divided by 18 on my calculator. 10 divided by 18, hit equals, tells me it's that big huge long decimal, and then I'm going to come across here and I need to hit the second function button, and once I do that you will see the sine, cos and tan down here is changed all into minus ones, and I want to hit, what is it? We're doing sine, inverse sine, so that button there. And it gives me the answer of 33.7. So remember what I did there? I did 10 divided by 18, and then I did the inverse sine button on my calculator. Other example, exactly the same as we did a minute ago. The first thing I do is I label my sides. This time I'm standing here, so coming across from it, there's my opposite. Hypotenuse is opposite the right angle box, and the adjacent is the one that's left over. I write down my rule. This lesson is always going to be sine. Sine x equals opposite over hypotenuse. I fill in my information. Sine x is going to be, the opposite is 32, the hypotenuse is 50. And then I'm going to try and get my answer, so I do the opposite of sine, so I do inverse sine, or sine minus 1, 32 over 50. And then I go to my calculator. Remember, it is the top number divided by the bottom number. So I should do 32 divided by 50. That gives me 0.64, and I want to do inverse sine, sine minus 1. You can see that the second function button has still been highlighted, so all I need to do is come down and hit sine minus 1. And that gives me 39.79, so if I round that properly, it will give me 39.8 degrees. So it's very similar to the last lesson, we're just using a different rule. So I've got a couple of questions for you to try just now before you go on and do the work from the textbook. So I'll have a little go at that one just now. Hit pause, have a go at it, see if you get it right. Okay, so I'm standing at x, so there's the opposite, there's the hypotenuse, that's the adjacent. I write down my rule. Sine x is opposite over hypotenuse. I fill in my two numbers. I take the 10 and the 23 and put them over here into the correct position. So 10 is the opposite, it goes on top. Hypotenuse is the bottom, which is 23. And then I'm going to get what x equals, so I'm going to need to do my inverse sine, 10 over 23. I go to my calculator. It's going to be top divided by bottom, so it's going to be 10 divided by 23. That equals, and then I want to inverse sine. So the sine minus 1 button, which is across here. Rounding that properly, that'll be 25.8. Okay, try the second one. Hit pause just now, see if you can get the answer right. So I'm standing at the x, so that's my opposite. That's my hypotenuse, that's my adjacent. I write down the rule. Sine x is opposite over hypotenuse. I fill in my information. Sine x, the opposite is 3, the hypotenuse is 8. And then I'm going to get the angle, so I need to do inverse sine 3 over 8. Go to my calculator. It's the top divided by the bottom, so it's going to be 3 divided by 8 equals, come across and hit the sine minus 1 button, 22.0, or just 22. Right, one more for you to try before we go on with the work. Hit pause, give it a go. Right, standing at the x, so there's my opposite, there's my hypotenuse, there's my adjacent. I write down the rule. Sine x is opposite over hypotenuse. I fill in the two numbers. The opposite is 124, the hypotenuse is 310. I'm now going to get my answer by doing the inverse sine 124 over 310. Go to my calculator. It's the top number divided by the bottom number. So it's going to be 124 divided by 310 equals 0.4, and I come across and hit my sine minus 1 button, 23.6. And again, I would expect to see that working for each question. Remember the steps. You start by labelling the sides, opposite, hypotenuse, adjacent. You write down the rule, you put the numbers into the rule, and then you use your calculator to get the final answer. Okay, if you look at the rest of the work on Google Classroom, you'll find an exercise from the textbook that I want you to try. Any questions, remember, put in a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.